This is the Minolta MC Rokkor 58mm 1.2, and honestly, it's my favourite lens that I've ever used. It was built in the 60s and it is a fully manual focus lens. It's very well built, and it has two features that are fairly unique. Firstly, it has a 1.2 aperture, which for portraits especially is just absolutely incredible. And secondly, it's radioactive. I don't know how dangerous it is. Apparently it's not that bad unless you put it close to your eye, which is weird because that's where you put a lens. But honestly, the photos from this lens are to die for. Sorry, that was pretty bad. It is really good though. Recently, I acquired a copy of Alec Soates' Sleeping by the Mississippi, which is an incredible book by an incredible photographer. Alec uses a large format film camera, and this enables him to get full-length environmental portraits of people, but with incredible background separation due to the fact that the film that the camera uses is just so large. Now, I immediately fell in love with this look, but I can't afford a large format camera, let alone afford the film to go in it or anything like that. So it got me thinking about how I could get that kind of look, but out of a full frame camera. So I went on a little research mission and I was just looking at loads of different lenses and trying to figure out how I could get that look out of my Sony a7 IV. And ultimately, after many nights of research, this 58mm 1.2 seemed to be the best bet. It's not without its flaws, don't get me wrong, it's not perfect, but it's really fun to shoot with. Although it's not appropriate for like 90% of jobs that I do, the 10% of jobs that I can use this lens for, I just absolutely love using it. So today I want to talk about a few pros and cons of this lens. So let's start with the positives. First up, we're going to go with the obvious one, which is bokeh. Now, nobody buys a 1.2 lens to shoot at f16. If you're going to spend the money on a 1.2 lens, you want to be shooting wide open at 1.2. And at 1.2, this lens does not disappoint. The out of focus areas in the image are incredible. The focus fall off, like how smooth it goes out of focus from the stuff that's in focus, is just really beautiful. It looks very dreamy, ethereal, and you really do get that large format look. I guess the lens you could probably closely compare it to is the Helios 442, which is another amazing lens with some beautiful swirly bokeh, but that lens only goes to f2, this lens goes to 1.2. You're getting a lot more kind of low light performance and you're getting a lot more out of focus background. I'm not really describing that very well. You know what I'm saying though, the background is insane, 10 out of 10 on this category. So secondly, let's talk about build quality. The build quality from this lens is incredible. It is weighty, it's all made of metal, everything feels really solid, the focus ring is smooth, the aperture ring clicks nicely. Overall, build quality, absolutely great. This lens, stop down especially, is very sharp. f2.8 onwards is incredibly sharp. f2 is good and f1.2 is not very good, but to be honest, it just adds to the dreamy character, the fact that it is quite soft wide open. I would say that it's a strong point of this lens, kind of 2.8 and beyond, but under that, it's kind of a weak point of this lens, so it's kind of a pro and a con really. Now, this lens does have a lot of disadvantages. I do think that the advantages massively outweigh it, and to be honest with you, like, the only reason that you're buying this lens is for f1.2, and it looks incredible at f1.2. So first up, let's talk about the fact that it's manual focus only. This isn't necessarily a problem. You will be only paying like £300–400 for a lens like this, so you can't really expect f1.2 and autofocus for less than probably about £1,000. So it is kind of a sacrifice that you have to make. However, I find manual focus pretty fun, especially on mirrorless cameras nowadays. You can punch in the image on the screen or look through the viewfinder and kind of zoom in on it, and you can nail manual focus pretty easily. It's not that hard. It is a bit of a challenge at 1.2 just because you really aren't getting a lot in focus, but overall, I don't really mind the manual focus experience of it. However, it's not going to be great for shooting moving subjects like wildlife or something like that. It'd just be a nightmare. I just don't even bother. Now let's talk a little bit about the softness at f1.2. It is very soft at f1.2, and not only that, but you do get some halation, you get some chromatic aberration, especially if you're shooting in high contrast scenarios. This is probably the biggest downside to this lens, but overall, I think it just adds to the look of the lens. If you were shooting with something like a 50mm 1.2 G Master, you wouldn't get any of that, but then again, the shot would look very sterile. You wouldn't really get that vintage lens look, so while this is a very big downside if you're trying to get a perfect image, it's not the worst, and overall, I think that some people might see it as an advantage. However, if you upload these photos to social media and just add a little bit of sharpening to the photos, you don't really see any of that softness anyway. While we're on the topic of f1.2, I just want to mention the most annoying thing about this lens is that it goes from 1.2 to f2. There's no in between, there's no 1.4, there's no 1.8. Why? Next up, let's talk about the price. You can pick these up for about £300 or £400 on eBay. It's a lot of money for a vintage lens, but ultimately you're getting a lens that takes photos that looks like no other lens that I've ever seen. So I think it's worth it. And if you compare it to something that is of a similar focal length and a similar aperture, but has autofocus, you're going to be spending about 4 or 5 times as much money, so I think it's fair. With it being a 50 or 60 year old lens, a lot of the copies that are on eBay do have haze and fungus. I do think, especially with this lens, that's going to be something you want to avoid, because having haze and fungus in your lens means that your photos are softer, and like I said, at 1.2, this lens is really clean and it's already quite soft at 1.2, so definitely try and pick up a copy without haze or fungus. Like I said before, the lens is radioactive. I don't know how important that is to you. It obviously can't be that radioactive if they still sell them. It can't be that dangerous. And I don't know, if I wake up with another finger, just means that I can change my camera settings a bit easier, so I'm not really that worried. The last thing to mention is lens flaring. Now, I didn't know whether to put this in the positives or negatives because it depends how you look at it. If you really want some vintage character out of your lens, this can be a really good thing. The flares are beautiful. The flares are kind of like a nice warm orange cast. So it definitely gives you like a nice cozy kind of look, I guess you could say that. If you are wanting a lens that creates some kind of like really surgically accurate kind of sterile photos, this is not the lens for you. But overall, a truly beautiful and one-of-a-kind lens. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit like and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and I will see you in the next one.